welcome back to the review. We're back here today for our final episode where we talk about the similarities and differences between the 3 telenovelas and shows that we watched. I'm Hannah.
I'm Savannah.
I'm Hillary.
And I'm Lillian. We're really sad today because it's our last episode. We all got fired because we lost funding. So we're just here to give you a very well thought out comparison of our first 3 episodes.
All right. So I think one of our biggest connections that we have in all 3 of these shows were how bad they represent the culture and the race itself, even if you want to call it race and go there and bring that into it, but of the culture itself and how they're portrayed as greedy or hypersexual or ugly. You could go polar opposites. But the way that these women, and men for that matter, but the way that these women are portrayed in these shows and how that creates such a negative impact on the culture itself.
Yeah, absolutely. In the first 2 shows, Sinceros No Hay Paraíso and Ruby as well, you can see some of the characters just being like absolutely gorgeous and hypersexual, but that's really their main substance. That's what they are. They're beautiful. You don't hear about them being smart, or you don't hear about them really going places or doing big things. You hear about them relying on their looks for everything. You hear about them being like just these really like sexual beings. And so it all comes down to their sexuality, and it just goes to show that for the culture and for Latin women to be able to get on TV, they are only cast in roles that show them as these sexual beings, and they are only recruited to play those kinds of things. Yeah. So it really just shows that that is where the main, I don't really want to say like the only interest lies, but really like Hollywood and producers really only look at that to show them as sexual beings and to cast them in roles that make them seem this way. Especially because not just in these 2 shows that we've seen, but in other shows, we continuously see Latina women being cast in these kinds of roles.
And even if not, they're not sexualized. They're like Ugly Betty. She's seen as ugly, and it shows that not really the sexualized part, but like the more how can I say that, like bad image.
Yeah, it shows the other side basically.
Right, yeah.
Like,
and so she has glasses and has braces, and it has a very negative view on them, especially for these younger viewers who watch these telenovelas. They grow up to see these telenovelas, and it has a very negative view for them to see that.
Creates a negative body image.
Yeah, because there's 2 completely different people that are shown in these TV shows.
I actually read an article about this exact thing. It's called Real Women Have Curves by Deborah Schooler, and it explains how damaging these views of if you're pretty, you'll get everything, or if you're ugly, you have to work extra hard. It enforces these views in young women, and it really damages their personality and who they could become in the future.
I read something very similar to that actually, called Dangerous Curves, and how Latina bodies are viewed in the media, and it talked about Ugly Betty, but it also talked about their portrayals as bigger characters like Salma Hayek in Frida, or it talked about Jennifer Lopez being the voluptuous singer and dancer that she is and that she's become known for. But as I stated in our first installment, the one question that I found very prominent was, what is it that's so desirable and consumable about this portrayal of women? Why is it that they have to be beautiful and voluptuous and curvy and poor in some cases, or educated and ugly in other cases? What is it about this that sells so well in the media?
yeah, and just like off of that, it's kind of hard. Like what, especially being Latina myself, I just think about it and I'm like, okay, like what is it that sells? Am I really not seen as anything deeper than just looks? Which, I mean, I'm sure it's a lot different where you are. where you are in the world, what you're doing with your life. I mean, being in college, it's a lot different because I feel like people are more open-minded and diverse, and of course, like, you get to know people and they don't just think like, oh, her looks or oh, something like that, you know. But it really just goes to show, I mean, and I wanted to do a little bit more research about this myself just because I was so concerned. And so I looked up this article called Living Telenovelas, Telenovelizing Life, Mexican American Girls. And it really just talks about their identities and how telenovelas are made specifically for, you know, to capture young teens and to bring them in to watch these. And so it really just reflects on the culture because my whole life I've grown up. My mom watched telenovelas, my grandma watched telenovelas, I watched telenovelas. And as it goes down into the system, you see that it's a part of the culture now. And so if the culture is saying this about the culture, it's kind of like, well, where do you go from there? That's all they're seen as in what Latin American productions make, as well as in American productions. I mean, this is just what the culture is portrayed as and perceived as in the media.
And I feel like that goes along with like the negative stereotypes that are shown in these, like with these portrayals in telenovelas. It has like a negative impact and makes everyone believe that this is how it is. And it actually isn't. I feel like there has to be for sure a change in this, especially with casting and producing. I read in an article that said Genders and Race Portrayals on Spanish Language Television by Riva Dinera. There is like a correlation between race and gender and how they're portrayed in these shows, and the main topic was the darker skin are more seen as more sexualized, like we see in RWBY, where and also not just sexualized, but you know, the darker the poorer, like we said in the second installation, where Alejandro, he's a doctor, he's great, but ended up being poor, and then Ruby, who's gorgeous, but also is poor. So I feel like that is a really big impact on this.
So I guess our next step to leave you guys off with is, what do you think the solutions or the answers to these questions would be? What is it that is so consumable about these portrayals? How do we go about correcting that in the media and representing a culture the way it should be with the people that it should be?
Yeah, it's just important to recognize that, like, even though we do see these things, there has been strides that have been made. You know, there are people who are being cast in different roles, and these stereotypes are being torn every day. But the majority of what we see today is still the stereotypes and the, you know, the racial, I don't know. It's just what people think.
Yeah.
And so you continuously see that from day to day, year to year, movie to movie, show to show. So it's just really important to recognize that there is some changes being made, but it's not enough. And we really need to be aware of this when we're watching these, when we're showing them to our kids, our siblings, you know. It's something that needs to have more awareness so that people really know, and also don't look at that as their culture, you know. That they don't see that as that's the only thing that they are.
All right, so thank you all for joining us for our last installment of the review.
Thank you.
Thank you.